The scorching sun beat down on Katherine Sullivan's pale skin as she struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, the rough hemp cutting into her flesh while vultures circled patiently in the cloudless Arizona sky above her death. It seemed was merely a matter of time. The year was 1878, and Katherine had been left to die in the unforgiving Sonoran Desert, miles from the nearest settlement, with nothing but the tattered remains of her once fine traveling dress and the crushing knowledge of her own betrayal. Her mouth was parched, her lips cracked and bleeding, and the relentless heat made it increasingly difficult to maintain consciousness. The men who had abandoned her, her late father's business partners, had taken everything, her inheritance, her reputation, and now, it seemed, her life. Katherine had journeyed west from Boston following her father's death, intending to invest her inheritance in a promising silver mining venture. Instead, she found herself the victim of an elaborate swindle. When she threatened to expose their fraudulent operation to the authorities, they decided a woman alone in the territory would not be missed. They had dragged her out into this godforsaken place, bound her to a withered mesquite tree, and left her to the elements. Hours passed like days as the sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Katherine's strength was fading. Her thoughts became clouded, and images of her childhood in Massachusetts flashed through her mind: cool autumn days and her father's gentle smile. How she wished now she had heeded her aunt's warnings about traveling west. The distant sound of hoofbeats penetrated her delirium, but she dismissed it as another hallucination, like the shimmering mirages that had been tormenting her all day. But the sound grew louder. Katherine forced her heavy eyelids open. Through the wavering heat rising from the desert floor, she saw a lone figure on horseback approaching. She tried to call out, but her throat was too parched to produce more than a raspy whisper. Samuel Irwin had been tracking a small herd of Mustangs for the better part of 2 days. At 28, he had established himself as one of the most skilled horse trainers in the territory, supplying mounts to ranchers, the cavalry, and anyone else willing to pay for quality horseflesh. He was a quiet man who preferred the company of horses to people, finding solace in the vast, open spaces of the Arizona territory. He'd first spotted the vultures circling from nearly a mile away and altered his course to investigate. Years of surviving in the harsh environment had taught him to pay attention to the desert signs. As he drew closer, he was shocked to see what appeared to be a woman tied to a tree. He spurred his stallion forward, covering the remaining distance at a gallop. Dismounting quickly, Samuel rushed to Katherine's side. Her once fine dress was torn and dust-covered, her auburn hair fallen from its pins and matted with sweat and dirt. But what struck him most was the defiant gleam still present in her hazel eyes, despite her dire condition. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, immediately pulling his canteen from his saddle and kneeling beside her. Katherine tried to respond, but only a hoarse sound escaped her lips. Samuel gently lifted her head and brought the canteen to her mouth. "Easy now. Just small sips at first." The water was warm, but felt like heaven against Katherine's parched throat. She coughed slightly as she tried to drink too quickly. "Slow down," Samuel cautioned, pulling the canteen away. "Too much too fast will make you sick." While she took carefully measured sips, Samuel examined the ropes binding her to the tree. Using his hunting knife, he carefully cut through them, noting with concern the raw, bloody marks they had left on her wrists. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Katherine managed to whisper, "Harding, Ann Wilcox." She fought to remain conscious as relief flooded through her. "Mining company, thieves. Save your strength, madam. You're safe now." Samuel helped her to her feet, but her legs immediately buckled beneath her. Without hesitation, he swept her into his arms. She was too light and burning with fever from exposure. Samuel carried her to his horse, a powerful chestnut stallion named Rusty. With practiced ease, he lifted her into the saddle before mounting behind her. One strong arm wrapped securely around her waist as he gathered the reins with his free hand. "My cabin's about 2 hours from here," he said, adjusting his broad-brimmed hat to better shade her face. "You just hold on, you hear?" Katherine nodded weakly, allowing herself to lean back against the solid wall of his chest. The steady rhythm of the horse's movement and the security of the cowboy's arm around her were the last sensations she registered before darkness claimed her. Samuel felt her go limp against him and tightened his hold. He urged Rusty into a ground-eating lope, careful not to jostle his unconscious passenger too much. As he rode, his mind raced. Who would leave a woman clearly well-bred from her speech and what remained of her clothing to die such a horrible death? The names she had mentioned, Harding and Wilcox, were vaguely familiar. He'd heard talk in town about New Eastern investors in some of the local mining operations, but he'd paid little attention to such matters. The journey to his cabin seemed interminable. Samuel periodically checked to ensure Katherine was still breathing, her pulse fluttering weakly beneath his fingertips. His cabin came into view just as the sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon, a modest structure nestled against the base of a rocky outcropping. With a small corral for his horses and a spring-fed creek nearby, he carried Katherine inside and gently laid her on his bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in clean blankets. The cabin was sparsely furnished but tidy, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding his few possessions. Samuel worked quickly to make her comfortable, removing her dust-covered boots and covering her with a light blanket. He dampened a cloth with cool water from a bucket and placed it on her forehead before setting about preparing a medicinal tea from herbs he'd learned to use from an old Apache woman who had once saved his life. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling incoherent phrases. Samuel kept vigil through the night, regularly replacing the cool cloth on her forehead and carefully helping her drink water and the bitter-tasting herbal tea when she was lucid enough. By morning, her fever had broken, and she awoke to find Samuel dozing in a chair pulled up beside the bed. For a moment, she simply studied him, his strong, tanned face softened in sleep, dark hair falling across his forehead, and the day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his features' character, etched by sun and wind and hardship. She must have made some small sound because his eyes suddenly opened, revealing irises the color of a summer sky. He straightened immediately, alert and concerned. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly rough from sleep. "Better, thank you," Katherine replied, surprised at how weak her own voice sounded. "I owe you my life, Mr. Irwin, Samuel Irwin, but most folks just call me Sam." He rose and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "And you are?" "Katherine Sullivan." She accepted the cup with shaking hands. "I'm from Boston." "You're a long way from home, Miss Sullivan." "Katherine, please." "And yes, I'm discovering that was perhaps a mistake." She took a sip of water, savoring the simple pleasure of quenching her thirst without desperation. Samuel nodded, seemingly satisfied that she was improving. "I need to see to my horses. Rest some more. There's stew warming on the stove when you feel up to eating." Before she could thank him again, he was gone, the cabin door closing quietly behind him. Katherine sank back against the pillow, taking stock of her situation. She was alive, against all odds, rescued by this quiet, serious cowboy. But her problems were far from over. Harding and Wilcox had stolen everything she owned, her father's money, her personal belongings, even the locket containing her mother's portrait. And they had tried to kill her. The thought made her shudder. She forced herself to sit up, fighting a wave of dizziness. The cabin was small but clean and orderly. Through the single window, she could see Samuel in the distance, leading a beautiful black mare into a corral. She watched as he moved among the horses with confident, gentle motions, clearly at ease with the animals in a way he wasn't with people, or at least, not with her. By the time Samuel returned, Katherine had managed to make it to the table and was slowly eating a bowl of the promised stew, a simple but flavorful combination of beans, dried meat, and chilies. "You shouldn't be up," he said, frowning as he removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "I've imposed enough already. Besides, I'm feeling much stronger." It wasn't entirely true she felt as weak as a newborn calf, but her determination to recover her strength outweighed her discomfort. Samuel regarded her with a skeptical expression, but didn't argue. He served himself a bowl of stew and sat across from her at the table. "Once you're well enough to travel, I'll take you to the town of Copper Springs. It's about a day's ride from here. The sheriff there is a good man. He'll help you deal with those fellas who did this to you." Katherine nodded. though the prospect of confronting Harding and Wilcox filled her with dread. "They're dangerous men, Mr. Irwin." "Sam," he corrected automatically. "And I reckon men who'd leave a woman to die in the desert are dangerous indeed. All the more reason to get the law involved." "They have connections," she explained, setting down her spoon. "My father invested in their mining company. When he died 6 months ago, I inherited his shares. I traveled here to inspect the operation and discovered they've been falsifying reports to investors. There is no silver being mined, at least, none that's being reported. When I confronted them—" She trailed off, the memory still too fresh and painful. Samuel's expression darkened. "So, they decided to eliminate the problem." Katherine nodded. "They told me they were taking me to see another part of the mining operation. Once we were far enough from town, they—" Her voice broke, and she looked away, fighting to maintain her composure. "You don't need to say more," Samuel said quietly. "What matters is, you survived, and now you can see justice done." "Justice?" Katherine gave a bitter laugh. "They've taken everything, Mr. Irwin, Sam. My father's investment, my personal belongings, even the documents proving my ownership stake in the company. It would be my word against theirs, and in this territory, who would believe a woman over established businessmen?" Samuel considered this. "Sheriff Matthews might. Like I said, he's a good man, and I'd stand as witness to what they did to you. You found me in the desert. You didn't see them leave me there," she pointed out. "No. But I saw what they did to you, and those marks on your wrists tell a story no honest man could ignore." Katherine absently rubbed her bandaged wrists. Samuel had carefully cleaned and wrapped them while she was unconscious. The pain was still there, but muted now. "Thank you for tending to me," she said softly. "It was nothing," he replied, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You should rest more. We can talk about what to do next when you're stronger." Over the next few days, Katherine gradually regained her strength. Samuel proved to be a surprisingly considerate host, giving her space while ensuring she had everything she needed. He slept on a bedroll near the fireplace, insisting she keep the bed. During the day, he went about his work with the horses, occasionally bringing her to sit in the shade outside so she could watch him train the wild mustangs he'd captured. Katherine found herself fascinated by his methods. Unlike other horse trainers she'd observed during her journey west, who relied on force and intimidation, Samuel used patience and gentle persistence. He spoke to the horses in low, soothing tones, gradually earning their trust before ever attempting to saddle them. "You have a gift with them," she remarked on the 4th day, as he worked with a spirited young buckskin gelding. Samuel glanced over, seeming almost surprised that she was watching. "Horses are honest," he said simply. "They don't lie or cheat. Treat them with respect, and they'll do the same." "Unlike people?" she asked, sensing the underlying sentiment. He shrugged, returning his attention to the gelding. "Some people are worth the trouble. Most aren't." "Which category do I fall into?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Samuel looked at her again, his blue eyes intense beneath the brim of his hat. "Still deciding," he answered, but there was a hint of something that might have been humor in his tone. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of rabbit stew Samuel had caught and prepared it earlier, Katherine broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "I need to return to town," she said. "I can't hide out here forever, and those men need to be held accountable." Samuel nodded slowly. "You're still weak." "I'm much stronger than I was, and every day we delay gives them more time to cover their tracks." She set down her spoon. "Besides, I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's no imposition," he said quickly, then looked almost surprised at himself. "What I mean is, you're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered." "That's very kind, but I need to take action. They've stolen everything I had, my father's legacy, my future." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And I suspect they'll come looking for me once they realize I'm not dead. I won't put you at risk by staying here." Samuel's expression hardened. "Let them come." The quiet confidence in his voice sent a shiver down Katherine's spine, not of fear, but of something else entirely. In the few days she'd known him, she'd come to recognize that Samuel Irwin was not a man who made threats lightly. His calm exterior concealed a core of steel. "Still," she insisted, "I need to go to town. If not to confront them immediately, then at least to send a telegram to my aunt in Boston. She should know what's happened. Samuel considered this, then nodded. We'll leave for Copper Springs tomorrow, but I'm going with you. You've already done so much. This isn't negotiable, he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Those men tried to kill you once. I'm not giving them a second chance. Katherine wanted to protest, but found herself oddly comforted by his protectiveness. Very well, thank you. Samuel rose from the table and began clearing away their dishes. You should prepare for a long ride. It'll take most of the day to reach town. Katherine helped him clean up, aware of his presence beside her in the small cabin, the clean, masculine scent of him, the careful way he moved to avoid crowding her. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, she felt safer in his company than she had in months. That night, as she lay in his bed listening to his steady breathing from across the room, Katherine reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been dining with Harding and Wilcox at the finest hotel in Copper Springs, believing herself to be a businesswoman on the verge of taking control of her inheritance. Now she was a penniless victim, dependent on the kindness of a solitary cowboy. Yet, somehow, she didn't feel defeated. Something about Samuel's quiet strength had rekindled her determination. Tomorrow, they would ride to town, and she would begin the fight to reclaim what was rightfully hers. And somehow, knowing Samuel would be by her side made the prospect far less daunting. The journey to Copper Springs began at dawn. Samuel had fashioned a riding skirt for Katherine from one of his old blankets, allowing her to ride astride rather than side saddle. He'd offered her the gentle black mare, Moon, while he rode Rusty. They set out as the first rays of sunlight painted the desert in gold and crimson. Katherine was still weaker than she wanted to admit. By midday, when they stopped to rest in the shade of a rocky overhang, she was dizzy with exhaustion. Samuel noticed immediately, his keen eyes missing nothing. We can make camp early, he suggested, handing her the canteen. Reach town tomorrow instead. No, Katherine insisted, taking a careful sip of water. I'll be fine. I need to get there today. Samuel studied her face, concern evident in his expression, but he didn't argue. We'll take it slower this afternoon. No sense pushing yourself into a collapse. As they continued their journey, Katherine found herself opening up about her life before coming west, her childhood in Boston, her father's successful shipping business, her mother's death from influenza when Katherine was just 12. Samuel listened quietly, occasionally asking a question, but mostly allowing her to fill the silence between them. What about you? She finally asked. How did you end up alone in the Arizona territory? Samuel was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing each word. I came west with my family in '65, right after the war. My father had fought for the Union and came home, changed. Thought starting fresh in new territory might help. He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. We had a small ranch near Tucson. Parents, me, and my little sister, Emma. Katherine noticed the past tense. What happened? Apache raid in '68. I was out hunting. Came back to find... He trailed off, his jaw tightening. After that, I couldn't stay there. Drifted north, worked cattle drives, broke horses for whoever would pay. Eventually saved enough for my own place. I'm so sorry, Katherine said softly, understanding now his solitary nature. How old were you? 18. His response was clipped, and she knew he didn't want to elaborate further. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk, the only sounds breaking the desert quiet. Katherine found herself studying Samuel's profile when he wasn't looking the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert to any potential threat. Town's just over that ridge, he said eventually, pointing to a distant line of hills. We should arrive before sundown. As they crested the ridge, Copper Springs came into view below them, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley between copper-rich hills. The town had grown rapidly in recent years as the mining industry boomed. What had once been a small settlement was now a bustling community with a proper main street, several saloons, a hotel, and various businesses catering to miners and ranchers alike. Katherine felt a surge of anxiety at the sight. Somewhere down there, Harding and Wilcox were going about their business. perhaps believing they had successfully eliminated the threat she posed. Her hands tightened on the reins, causing Moon to toss her head in protest. "Easy," Samuel murmured, and Katherine wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or the horse. "We'll go straight to the sheriff. Better if Harding and Wilcox don't know you're back until the law's involved." She nodded, grateful for his clear thinking. Her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions: fear, anger, determination, and beneath it all, an unexpected reluctance to end her time alone with Samuel. In his isolated cabin, with only his horses for company, she had found a strange peace despite her circumstances. They rode into town as the sun was setting, casting long shadows down the dusty main street. Samuel led them directly to the sheriff's office, a small building with a single barred window and a faded sign identifying it as the seat of local law enforcement. He dismounted first, then helped Katherine down, his strong hands spanning her waist as he lifted her effortlessly from the saddle. "Wait here," he said, tying both horses to the hitching post. "Let me make sure Matthews is in." Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look in her borrowed clothing, her hair hastily braided and tucked beneath Samuel's spare hat. But such concerns seemed trivial, given what she had endured. Samuel returned a moment later with a tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a tarnished silver star on his vest. Sheriff Matthews had a weathered face topped by iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes widened slightly at the sight of Katherine. "Miss Sullivan, John Matthews." He extended a hand, which she shook firmly. "Irwin here tells me you've had a rough time. Come on inside where we can talk properly." The sheriff's office was sparsely furnished, but neat. A desk covered in papers dominated one side, while a small stove in the corner provided warmth. 3 cells lined the back wall, all currently empty. "Have a seat, madam." Matthews gestured to a chair beside the desk, then turned to Samuel. "You too, Irwin. I want to hear this whole story." Katherine took a deep breath and began her account, starting with her arrival in Copper Springs and her discovery of Harding and Wilcox's fraudulent operation. She described how they had lured her out into the desert under false pretenses, her voice faltering only slightly when she recounted being bound to the tree and left to die. Samuel watched her silently, his face impassive save for the muscle working in his jaw. When she finished, Sheriff Matthews leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Sullivan. Attempted murder, fraud, theft. These are hanging offenses." "I'm aware," Katherine replied steadily, "and I'm prepared to testify to everything I've told you." "Problem is," Matthews said, rubbing his chin, "without those documents you mentioned or other evidence, it's your word against theirs, and Harding and Wilcox are influential men in this town. They've brought a lot of investment money west." "Are you saying you don't believe her?" Samuel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff held up a placating hand. "I didn't say that, Irwin. I believe Miss Sullivan is telling the truth. But believing and proving in a court of law are different matters." "They tried to kill her," Samuel insisted, leaning forward. "The rope marks on her wrists." "Could have been from anything," Matthews interrupted. "Don't misunderstand me. I aim to investigate this thoroughly, but I need to be cautious about how I proceed. These men have friends in high places, including Judge Wilson, who presides over this district." Katherine felt a crushing wave of disappointment. Even here with the law, the odds seemed stacked against her. "So they'll get away with it," she said flatly. "Not if I can help it," Matthews assured her. "But we need to be smart. For now, they don't know you survived. That gives us an advantage." "What do you suggest?" Samuel asked. "Miss Sullivan needs to stay somewhere safe while I quietly gather evidence. If Harding and Wilcox see her in town, they'll know their plan failed, and they might try again or flee before we can build a case against them." Katherine nodded slowly, seeing the logic. "But where can I stay? I have no money for a hotel, and I can't risk being recognized." Sheriff Matthews looked at Samuel, who straightened almost imperceptibly. "My ranch is isolated," he said after a moment. "No one would think to look for her there." "My thoughts exactly," Matthews agreed. "And Irwin here has a reputation that would make most men think twice about causing trouble." Katherine glanced between the two men, uncomfortable with decisions being made about her safety without her input. "I appreciate the concern, but I should have some say in this." Samuel's eyes met hers, surprisingly gentle despite his stern expression. You do. If you have another suggestion, we'll hear it. She considered the alternatives and found none that seemed viable. Returning to Samuel's cabin was the most practical solution, even if it meant prolonging their unusual living arrangement. Very well, but I won't hide indefinitely while you build a case. 1 week, Sheriff. Then we take whatever evidence we have to the territorial court. Matthews nodded, respecting her resolve. Fair enough. In the meantime, I'll need a detailed description of these documents you mentioned, and anything else that might help prove your claims. And Irwin, he turned to Samuel. Keep her safe, you hear? With my life, Samuel replied simply, and something in his tone made Katherine's heart beat faster. Before leaving town, they stopped briefly at the general store, where Samuel purchased supplies along with a ready-made dress and other necessities for Katherine. He paid without comment, waving away her promises to reimburse him when she recovered her money. Consider it a loan, if it makes you feel better, was all he said, as they loaded the supplies onto the horses. Night had fallen by the time they departed, and Samuel led them on a circuitous route out of town, avoiding the main roads and keeping to shadows. It was slow going in the darkness, but Katherine understood the precaution. If anyone loyal to Harding and Wilcox had seen her at the sheriff's office, they needed to be careful. They made camp in a secluded arroyo several miles from town, Samuel declaring it too dangerous to travel the full distance to his ranch in darkness. He efficiently built a small, nearly smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal from their supplies. I'm sorry about all this, Katherine said as they sat side by side near the fire, the night chill drawing them closer to the flames. You've been dragged into my troubles without any choice in the matter. Samuel looked at her across the flickering light. I made my choice when I cut you down from that tree, he said quietly, and I don't regret it. Still, your life was peaceful before I arrived. Now you're harboring a fugitive, essentially. A faint smile crossed his face. Peaceful isn't always the same as living, Miss Sullivan. Katherine, she corrected him. After all we've been through, I think you can use my given name. He nodded, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Katherine, then. And my life wasn't as idyllic as you might think. Lonely, mostly. The admission clearly cost him something. Katherine sensed Samuel wasn't a man who easily revealed his feelings. I understand loneliness, she said softly. After my father died, I felt it even among crowds of people in Boston. That's partly why I came west to start fresh, make my own way. And instead, you found more trouble. Yes, but I also found you. The words hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended. Samuel's gaze intensified, and for a moment, Katherine thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stood abruptly. You should rest. We'll leave at first light. He unrolled a blanket for her near the fire, then moved to the edge of their small camp, his back to her as he kept watch. Katherine settled onto the makeshift bed, aware of his silhouette against the star-strewn sky. Despite the danger of their situation, she felt utterly safe in his presence, a feeling both comforting and confusing, given how little she truly knew about this solitary cowboy who had saved her life. The next day's journey was tense, with Samuel constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. They avoided the main trails, instead picking their way through rough country that Samuel clearly knew well. By mid-afternoon, they arrived back at his cabin, which seemed even more isolated than Katherine had remembered. It's not much, Samuel said as he helped her dismount. But it's secure. No one comes out this way without me knowing about it. Katherine looked around at the rugged beauty of the place, the cabin nestled against rocks, the small corral where several horses now grazed, the clear creek bubbling nearby. It's peaceful, she said. I felt safe here before. Something in Samuel's expression softened. You'll be safe here again. Over the next few days, they settled into an unexpected domesticity. Katherine insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending Samuel's worn clothing, while he tended to his horses and made the cabin more comfortable for her presence. He built a privacy screen from old blankets so she could have some separation in the small space, constructed a second bed frame so he no longer had to sleep on the floor, and even fashioned a crude bathtub that could be filled with heated water from the creek. On the third evening, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Katherine found herself studying Samuel's profile again. The golden light softened his weathered features, highlighting the strength in his jaw and the surprising length of his eyelashes. "You're staring," he said without looking at her, a hint of amusement in his voice. Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was just thinking, about how little I know about you, despite—" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, at the strange intimacy that had developed between them. "You know my whole life story, but you've shared very little of yours." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Not much to tell beyond what you already know. After my family was killed, I was lost, angry, did some things I'm not proud of." "What kind of things?" she asked gently. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Spent some time hunting Apache. Joined a militia for a while, until I realized we weren't any better than they were. Violence for the sake of violence." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "Not something I'm proud of." Katherine considered this revelation. "You were grieving. Seeking vengeance is a natural response to such loss." "Natural, maybe, right?" "No." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "Took me years to understand that. An old Apache medicine woman helped me see it. Found me half dead in the desert after a skirmish shot and left behind. She could have let me die. Should have after what I'd done to her people. Instead, she healed me. Taught me that hatred is a poison that kills the one who harbors it first. That's why you live out here alone, as penance?" Samuel shook his head. "Not penance, peace. I found I preferred the company of horses to most people. They don't judge, don't carry grudges." "Yet you didn't hesitate to help me," Katherine observed. "A stranger." His eyes met hers, intensely blue even in the fading light. "Some things you don't think about. You just do what's right." Katherine felt something shift between them, a deepening of understanding, a connection forming beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the silence. Samuel was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside," he ordered quietly. "Stay away from the windows." Katherine obeyed, heart pounding as she retreated into the cabin. Through a small gap in the shuttered window, she watched as Samuel moved to meet the approaching rider. His stance relaxed but alert. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Sheriff Matthews. The lawman dismounted, greeting Samuel with a nod before they engaged in conversation too distant for her to hear. After a few minutes, Samuel gestured toward the cabin, and Matthews followed him to the door. "Miss Sullivan," the sheriff said as he entered, removing his hat. "Good to see you looking better than when we last met." "Thank you, Sheriff. Do you have news?" Matthews nodded, accepting the seat Samuel offered at the small table. "Some. I've been quietly investigating Harding and Wilcox. Found a former employee of theirs willing to talk fellow named Jenkins, who worked as their bookkeeper until recently. Says he was fired for asking too many questions about the company ledgers." Hope surged in Katherine's chest. And he's confirmed your suspicions. The mine is producing silver, but they've been keeping 2 sets of books, one showing minimal profits for investors, another tracking the actual yield, which is substantial. Jenkins says they've been siphoning off the difference for themselves. "That matches what I discovered," Katherine said eagerly. "But without those documents—" "Jenkins kept copies," Matthews interrupted with a satisfied smile. "Not everything, but enough to raise serious questions. Combined with your testimony, it might be enough to convince Judge Wilson to issue arrest warrants." Samuel, who had been leaning against the doorframe listening, straightened. "Might?" Matthews sighed. "Wilson and Harding are friendly. I'll need to present an ironclad case to get him to act against his own interests. But I'm working on it." He turned back to Katherine. "There's something else you should know. Harding and Wilcox have hired men to search for your body. They're getting nervous that it hasn't been found." Katherine felt a chill despite the warm evening. "They want to make sure I'm dead." "Seems that way. All the more reason for you to stay put until I can build this case properly." Matthews rose to leave. "I'll return in 3 days with news, hopefully including those arrest warrants. In the meantime, keep her hidden, Irwin." After the sheriff departed, Samuel secured the cabin doors and windows, his movements efficient but tense. Katherine watched him, sensing his concern. "They don't know I'm here," she said, trying to reassure him and herself. No, but they're looking... And desperate men are dangerous. He checked his revolver before setting it on the table within easy reach. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Better vantage point if anyone approaches. Samuel? She stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. You don't have to do that. The nights are getting cold. He looked down at her hand, then at her face, something unreadable in his expression. I promised Matthews I'd keep you safe. I aim to keep that promise. You can keep me safe from in here, she insisted, and I'll sleep better knowing you're not freezing in the barn. For a moment she thought he would argue further, but finally he nodded. All right, but at the first sign of trouble. I'll do exactly as you say, she finished for him. I trust you, Samuel. Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Surprise. And perhaps something deeper. He nodded once more before moving to check the locks again, seemingly needing the distraction. That night, as they lay in their separate beds on opposite sides of the small cabin, Katherine found sleep elusive. The knowledge that Harding and Wilcox were actively searching for her body filled her with dread, but beneath that fear was a growing awareness of Samuel's presence nearby. His steady breathing in the darkness, a reminder that she wasn't facing this danger alone. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Katherine awoke to find Samuel already up, stoking the fire in the small stove. He nodded a greeting, his expression guarded, as if their moment of connection the previous evening had made him uncomfortable. I need to check the horses and repair some fencing today, he said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. You'll be all right here alone? Of course. She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. I've imposed on your routine enough. Don't worry about me. Samuel hesitated, clearly torn between his responsibilities and his concern for her safety. Stay inside with the door locked. My rifle is loaded, just in case. After he left, Katherine busied herself with domestic tasks, finding an unexpected comfort in the simple routine of sweeping the cabin floor and preparing a stew for their evening meal. Through the window, she occasionally caught glimpses of Samuel working with the horses in the distance, his movements fluid and confident. By midday, the cabin had grown warm, and Katherine decided to step onto the porch for some fresh air, reasoning that she could quickly retreat inside if necessary. She sat in the simple wooden chair Samuel had made, enjoying the breeze and the vast panorama of desert and mountains stretching to the horizon. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching riders. Katherine stood quickly, intending to hurry back inside, but froze when she saw 3 men cresting the nearest hill. Even at this distance, she recognized the stocky figure in the lead James Harding himself, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize, likely hired guns. Panic seized her. The riders hadn't spotted her yet, but they were heading directly for the cabin. Samuel was nowhere in sight, having ridden to the far end of his property to check fencing. Katherine darted inside, securing the door and grabbing Samuel's rifle from beside the fireplace. Her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded, her mind racing. She could hide, but they would likely search the cabin. She could try to run, but on foot, she wouldn't get far. Her best option was to somehow warn Samuel without alerting the approaching men to her presence. Moving to the back window, Katherine saw that the riders were now less than a quarter mile away. She made a split-second decision. Slipping out the rear door, she kept low, using the cabin for cover, as she made her way to the small shed where Samuel kept his tools. Inside, she found what she was looking for, a small mirror used for shaving. Climbing onto a crate, she angled the mirror to catch the sunlight, directing flashes toward the distant hillside where she had last seen Samuel. It was a desperate gamble, but she remembered her father teaching her about signal mirrors during their sailing trips off the Massachusetts coast. After several tense moments, she saw movement on the hillside. Samuel galloping toward the cabin, having spotted her signal. Relief flooded through her, only to be replaced by fresh fear as she realized he would be riding straight into danger. The sound of men's voices outside the cabin spurred her into action. They were dismounting, approaching the front door. Katherine slipped from the shed and circled wide around the property, staying low among the scrub brush. She needed to intercept Samuel before he rode into view of the cabin. She reached a stand of mesquite trees just as Samuel approached, waving frantically to catch his attention. He spotted her and immediately reined in. dismounting in one fluid motion and leading his horse into the cover of the trees. "Harding," she whispered urgently as he reached her, "and 2 others, at the cabin." Samuel's expression hardened. "How did they find us?" "I don't know. Maybe they followed the sheriff yesterday." Samuel considered this, then checked his revolver. "Stay here with Rusty. If you hear shooting, mount up and ride east toward the mountains. There's a line shack about 5 miles in that direction. Wait for me there." "What are you going to do?" she asked, fear making her voice tremble. "Create a distraction. Draw them away from the cabin." He met her eyes, his gaze intense. "Promise me you'll stay hidden unless there's no other choice." "I promise." She clutched his arm. "Samuel, be careful. These men tried to kill me once. They won't hesitate to kill you too." Something softened in his expression. Without warning, he pulled her to him, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers in a brief, fierce kiss. "For luck," he murmured as he released her, then disappeared into the brush before she could respond. Katherine remained hidden, heart pounding, fingers pressed to her lips, where the warmth of his unexpected kiss lingered. From her vantage point, she could see the cabin and the 3 men now searching around it. Harding was shouting orders, his voice carrying on the still air. "She has to be here somewhere. Search the outbuildings." Wilcox said that Cowboy was seen with a woman matching her description in town. The 2 hired guns spread out, one heading toward the corral, the other toward the tool shed Katherine had used minutes earlier. Harding himself remained near the cabin, rifle in hand, scanning the surroundings. A sudden gunshot rang out from the distant hillside, Samuel creating his distraction. All 3 men whirled toward the sound, raising their weapons. A second shot kicked up dust near Harding's feet, causing him to dive for cover behind a water trough. "There, on the ridge!" one of the gunmen shouted, pointing toward a rocky outcropping where a figure Samuel was briefly visible before disappearing again. "After him!" Harding commanded. "That's the cowboy who took her. He'll know where she is." The 2 hired guns mounted their horses and took off toward the ridge, while Harding remained behind, still seeking cover near the cabin. Katherine realized with mounting dread that Samuel's plan had only partially worked. The gunmen had been drawn away, but Harding was still too close to her hiding place. She watched as Samuel appeared briefly on another section of the ridge, drawing fire from the pursuing gunmen before vanishing again. He was leading them on a chase away from the cabin, but with Harding still present, Katherine remained trapped. Making a decision, she took Samuel's rifle and carefully aimed at a point well away from both Harding and the pursuing gunman. She fired once, the shot echoing across the landscape. As she had hoped, the unexpected shot from a new direction confused everyone. Harding ducked lower, looking wildly around for the source. Katherine quickly moved to a new position, fired again, then scrambled back to where Rusty waited patiently. The strategy worked. Harding, clearly panicked by the idea of being caught in a crossfire, ran to his horse and galloped away in the direction his men had taken, toward where Samuel was still leading them on a chase across the ridgeline. Once Harding was out of sight, Katherine mounted Rusty and rode swiftly in the opposite direction, following Samuel's instructions to head for the line shack in the mountains. The powerful stallion seemed to sense her urgency, carrying her across the rough terrain at a pace that ate up the distance. The line shack proved to be little more than a one-room structure with a sagging roof, used by cowboys during roundups. Katherine led Rusty inside the crude shelter and secured the door as best she could with a broken chair propped against it. Then she waited, rifle ready, listening for any sound of pursuit. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The sun began to set, casting long shadows through the single dirty window of the shack. Katherine fought against rising panic. Had Samuel been captured, shot? Or was he simply being cautious, waiting until he was certain it was safe to join her? Just as darkness fell completely, she heard the approach of a horse. Katherine raised the rifle, positioning herself to the side of the window where she could see out without being easily spotted. Relief washed over her as she recognized Samuel's silhouette in the moonlight. She quickly moved the chair and opened the door. Samuel dismounted wearily, leading his horse, not the one he had ridden earlier, she noted, into the shack. In the dim light, she could see a dark stain on his shirt sleeve. "You're hurt," she said, immediately moving to examine the wound. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." Despite his dismissive words, he winced as she helped him remove his jacket. Harding and his men headed back toward town, last I saw. I managed to confuse them by firing from different positions. They thought they were surrounded. She tore a strip from her petticoat to bind his wounded arm. What happened to your horse? Had to switch. Mine took a bullet. Not fatal, but I couldn't ride him. Samuel's face was grim. Borrowed this one from Harding's men. Katherine's hands stilled. You didn't? No, I didn't kill them. Just persuaded them their employer wasn't paying them enough for this kind of trouble. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Amazing how convincing a well-placed bullet can be when it comes to career decisions. Despite everything, Katherine found herself laughing. The release of tension almost dizzying. Samuel joined her, his deep chuckle filling the small space of the shack. When their laughter subsided, they found themselves standing close, her hands still on his arm, his eyes reflecting the faint moonlight coming through the window. You kissed me, she said softly, before you left. Samuel's expression grew serious. I did. Why? He hesitated, seeming to search for words. Because I might not have gotten another chance. The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. Without allowing herself to overthink, Katherine leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Unlike his earlier brief kiss, this one lingered, deepening as Samuel's good arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally separated, both breathing unevenly, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. This is madness, he murmured. You're a Boston society lady. I'm just a cowboy with a patch of desert and a few horses. I'm a woman who was left to die in the desert, Katherine corrected him. And you're the man who saved me. Everything else seems less important after that. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, as if searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he kissed her again, more urgently this time. Katherine responded with equal fervor, the fear and tension of the day transforming into a desperate need for connection, for affirmation of life. They spent the night in the line shack, huddled together on Samuel's bedroll for warmth and comfort. Despite the intensity of their kisses, they went no further, a mutual, unspoken agreement to wait for a time when they weren't fugitives, when the choice could be made without the influence of danger and fear. As dawn broke, Samuel stirred beside her. We need to move, he said quietly. Harding will be back, probably with more men. Where can we go? They know about your cabin now. Samuel considered this as he checked his wounded arm, which Katherine had bandaged the night before. Sheriff Matthews should be back tomorrow with news. We need to stay hidden until then. Could we go to Copper Springs, seek protection at the sheriff's office? Too risky, Harding has influence there, and if the sheriff isn't back yet? He shook his head. No, we need somewhere they wouldn't think to look. After some discussion, they decided to head deeper into the mountains. To a place Samuel knew from his days tracking wild horses, a hidden canyon with a spring, grass for the horses, and a cave that offered shelter. It was a hard ride over rough terrain, but by midday they reached the secluded spot. The canyon was even more beautiful than Samuel had described, with towering red rock walls, a clear spring forming a small pool, and enough vegetation to keep their horses fed. The cave was dry and surprisingly spacious, with a narrow entrance that could be easily defended. While Samuel gathered wood for a small fire, Katherine explored their temporary sanctuary, marveling at the unexpected beauty of this hidden place. She found herself thinking about the future, a concept that had seemed uncertain since her ordeal in the desert. What would happen once Harding and Wilcox were brought to justice? Would she return to Boston, to the life she had known? The thought no longer held the appeal it once had. That evening, as they sat beside a carefully shielded fire at the mouth of the cave, Katherine broached the subject. What will you do once this is over? Return to your cabin? Samuel poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. Depends. On what? He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. On you. Katherine's heart quickened. Me? These past days, having you at the cabin. He struggled with the words, this man more comfortable with actions than emotional declarations. It wasn't so lonely. She understood what he was trying to say, what it cost this solitary man to admit even this much. I felt the same, she said softly. You have a life waiting in Boston. People who care about you. Just my aunt, and while I love her, I've discovered something about myself since coming west. Katherine moved to sit beside him. I'm stronger than I knew, more capable. I don't want to go back to being the proper Boston lady whose greatest decision is what to wear to tea. Samuel's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. And what do you want instead? A life that matters, work that means something. She looked up at him. Someone to share it with who sees me for who I really am. The kiss that followed was tender, a promise rather than the desperate connection of the previous night. When they separated, Samuel's expression was more open than she had ever seen it. I'm not a man of many words, he said quietly, but I want you to stay, here in Arizona territory, with me, if that's what you want too. It is, Katherine answered without hesitation. Though I'll warn you, I know nothing about ranching or breaking horses. A rare smile spread across his face. I'm a good teacher. They spent 2 days in the hidden canyon, living off the supplies Samuel had packed and the small game he managed to hunt. During that time, their relationship deepened, both physically and emotionally. Samuel began teaching Katherine about survival in the desert, how to find water, which plants were edible, how to read the weather and the land. In turn, she shared stories of her life in Boston, her education, her dreams for the future. On the morning of the 3rd day, they decided it was time to risk returning to civilization. Sheriff Matthews would be looking for them, hopefully with the arrest warrants they needed to finally confront Harding and Wilcox. They approached Copper Springs cautiously, circling wide to avoid the main roads. Samuel led them to a small homestead on the outskirts of town, explaining that it belonged to a friend he trusted, a widow named Clara Jensen, who had once hired him to break horses for her late husband's small ranch. Clara proved to be a plain-spoken woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She welcomed them without questions, ushering them inside her modest home and immediately setting about preparing a meal while Samuel explained their situation. Matthews was here yesterday looking for you too, Clara informed them as she placed a steaming pot of stew on the table. Said to tell you, if you showed up, that he's got those warrants. Harding and Wilcox are holed up at their office in town, with guards posted. They know something's coming. Hope surged through Katherine. Then it worked. Jenkins' evidence was enough. That and something else, Clara said, setting down bowls and spoons. A telegram came for the sheriff from Boston. Apparently, Miss Sullivan here isn't the only investor who's been asking questions. Several others have filed complaints about the mining company's suspicious reports. Samuel looked at Katherine, a rare smile touching his lips. Looks like you started something bigger than you knew. After they had eaten the first proper meal they had had in days, Samuel left to find Sheriff Matthews, promising to return quickly. Katherine remained with Clara, helping to clean up and learning more about the woman's life in Copper Springs. Clara had come west with her husband 20 years earlier, outlived him by 5, and managed the small ranch on her own ever since. Samuel's a good man, Clara said as they washed dishes together. Keeps to himself more than is healthy, if you ask me, but loyal to the bone. Yes, he is, Katherine agreed, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Clara studied her with shrewd eyes. And it seems he's found someone worth breaking his solitude for. Before Katherine could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the window, she saw Samuel returning with Sheriff Matthews and 2 deputies. We're moving on Harding and Wilcox now, Matthews announced as he entered the house. Their men spotted Samuel in town. They know we're coming, so there's no point in waiting any longer. I want to be there, Katherine insisted. Matthews shook his head. Too dangerous. They're desperate men, Miss Sullivan. With all due respect, Sheriff, they left me to die. I have a right to see them brought to justice. She stood her ground, chin lifted in determination. Samuel, who had been silent, stepped forward. She stays with me. I'll keep her safe. Matthews looked between them, recognizing the futility of argument. Fine, but you stay back, both of you. Let me and my deputies handle the arrests. The confrontation took place at the mining company office, a substantial 2-story building on the main street of Copper Springs. By the time they arrived, a crowd had gathered, word of the impending arrest having spread through town. Matthews positioned his deputies at the back entrance while he approached the front door with Samuel and Katherine hanging back. "Harding, Wilcox," Matthews called out. "This is Sheriff Matthews. I have warrants for your arrest. Come out peacefully." The response was a gunshot that splintered the doorframe near Matthews' head. The sheriff ducked, drawing his own weapon as the crowd scattered for cover. Samuel pulled Katherine behind the shelter of a nearby water trough. "Last chance," Matthews shouted. "Surrender now, or we'll come in shooting." After a tense silence, the door opened slowly. George Wilcox emerged first, hands raised, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. "Don't shoot," he called. "I'm coming out." As Wilcox was being handcuffed, a second shot rang out from an upstairs window. One of the deputies cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. Samuel pushed Katherine lower behind their cover, shielding her with his body. "Harding!" Matthews bellowed. "It's over! Throw out your weapon and come downstairs!" Instead of complying, Harding began firing wildly from the window, bullets pinging off the water trough and raising dust in the street. Samuel drew his revolver, taking careful aim at the window. His shot was precise, not aimed to kill, but to force Harding away from his vantage point. The strategy worked. Harding disappeared from the window, and moments later, smoke began billowing from the upper floor of the building. He had set a fire, either accidentally or deliberately in his desperation. "He's going to burn the evidence," Katherine realized with horror. Before anyone could stop him, Samuel was on his feet, racing toward the building. Katherine called out to him, but he didn't turn back. She watched, heart in her throat, as he disappeared through the front door. Agonizing minutes passed. The smoke thickened, flames becoming visible through the upstairs windows. Just as Katherine was about to run toward the building herself, regardless of the danger, two figures emerged through the smoke. Samuel, dragging a semi-conscious Harding by the collar. He deposited the mine owner roughly at Matthews' feet. "Found him trying to burn the company books," Samuel said, handing over a leather satchel he had salvaged from the fire. "These should help your case." The townsfolk organized a bucket brigade to fight the fire, while Matthews and his deputies secured the prisoners. Katherine rushed to Samuel, checking him for injuries as he coughed to clear the smoke from his lungs. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," she said, torn between anger at his recklessness and relief at his safe return. Samuel gave her a soot-streaked smile. "Couldn't let him destroy the evidence you need to reclaim what's yours." Later, at the sheriff's office, Matthews confirmed that the recovered documents included not only the falsified report sent to investors, but also the true accounting books showing the actual silver production and the substantial sums Harding and Wilcox had been pocketing. With this evidence, plus Jenkins' testimony and the complaints from other investors, they'll hang for sure, Matthews said. At the very least, they'll spend the rest of their lives in prison. Katherine felt no satisfaction at the thought, only a profound relief that justice would be served and that the ordeal was finally over. "What about the mine itself?" she asked. "Court will likely appoint a receiver until ownership can be sorted out," Matthews explained. "As one of the major investors, you'll have a claim to a significant portion, Miss Sullivan." The idea that she might recover her father's investment, and possibly much more, was overwhelming. After believing herself destitute and alone, Katherine now faced the prospect of financial security and, more importantly, a future with the man who had saved her in more ways than one. In the weeks that followed, the legal proceedings moved with surprising speed. Judge Wilson, eager to distance himself from any appearance of impropriety given his former association with the accused, ensured that the case received prompt attention. Harding and Wilcox were convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder, sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The court appointed Katherine as the primary receiver for the mining operation, acknowledging her father's substantial investment and her own role in exposing the fraud. With the help of Jenkins, the former bookkeeper who became the mine's new manager, she quickly learned the business, implementing honest accounting practices and ensuring all investors received their due returns. Samuel supported her throughout, offering quiet encouragement as she navigated these unfamiliar waters. He continued his horse-breaking business, but increasingly spent time helping Katherine with the mine administration, revealing an unexpected head for business beneath his taciturn exterior. 6 months after their harrowing ordeal in the desert, on a clear autumn day with the mountains painted gold and crimson by the setting sun, Samuel took Katherine riding to the hidden canyon that had sheltered them during their flight from Harding's men. There, beside the spring, he awkwardly dropped to one knee and offered her a simple silver ring, crafted by the town's silversmith from the first honest yield of her mine. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he said, his deep voice rough with emotion, "but I love you, Katherine Sullivan. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" With tears shimmering in her eyes, Katherine pulled him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times, yes. They were married 2 weeks later in Clara Jensen's front parlor, with Sheriff Matthews giving the bride away and Jenkins serving as best man. Katherine wore a simple ivory dress ordered from San Francisco, while Samuel looked uncommonly handsome in a new black suit that made him fidget uncomfortably until the moment he saw his bride and forgot everything else. Their honeymoon was spent at Samuel's cabin, no longer the sparse bachelor quarters it had once been, but a real home, expanded with the addition of a proper bedroom, a larger kitchen, and a covered porch where they could sit together in the evenings and watch the desert sunset. Life settled into a rhythm that blended their separate worlds. 3 days a week, Katherine rode into Copper Springs to oversee the mining business, which prospered under her careful management. The rest of the time, she worked alongside Samuel on their growing ranch, learning to ride like a proper cowgirl, to mend fences, and even to gentle the wild horses he captured. A year after their wedding, their joy was multiplied by the birth of a daughter, Emma Clara Irwin, named for Samuel's lost sister, and the woman who had sheltered them in their time of need. Katherine delivered the child in their own home, with Samuel pacing anxiously outside until the midwife placed his tiny daughter in his trembling hands. The sight of this strong, silent man, utterly undone by the 7-pound bundle in his arms, was something Katherine would treasure forever. Tears streamed unashamedly down his weathered cheeks as he cradled Emma with infinite gentleness, whispering promises of protection and love. As their family grew a son, Robert James, joined them 2 years later, so did their ranch. Using profits from the mine, they purchased adjacent land, built a larger home, and established the Irwin Ranch as one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the territory. Katherine never returned to Boston, though she maintained a correspondence with her aunt, who eventually came west for an extended visit and was so charmed by her great-niece and nephew that she relocated permanently, bringing with her Katherine's childhood piano and a trunk full of books that formed the nucleus of the children's education. On the 5th anniversary of the day Samuel had found Katherine bound to that mesquite tree in the desert, they rode out together at dawn, leaving the children in Clara's capable hands. They traveled to the exact spot where their story had begun, now marked by a small stone cairn Samuel had built. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the landscape in the same merciless light that had nearly claimed Katherine's life, Samuel pulled her into his arms. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying here instead of returning to civilization?" Katherine looked around at the vast, beautiful desolation that had once terrified her and now felt like home. "Never," she answered truthfully. "That day, when you lifted me into your saddle, you weren't just saving my life. You were showing me the way to really live it." Samuel kissed her then, the same passionate intensity in his touch as the first time, yet deepened now by years of shared joys and challenges, of building a life together from the most unlikely of beginnings. As they rode back toward their ranch, side by side in the golden morning light, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her west, into danger, and ultimately into the arms of the quiet cowboy who had become her heart's true home. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in her previous existence. The desert that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, harsh at times, demanding always, but authentic and deeply rewarding. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, the mountains turning purple in the distance and the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky, Katherine leaned against Samuel's shoulder, perfectly content. From the worst day of her life had come everything good, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love found in the most unexpected circumstances. Samuel's arm tightened around her shoulders, and she knew without words that his thoughts mirrored her own. They had both been alone, in their different ways, until fate and cruelty and courage had brought them together. Now, neither would ever face the wilderness alone again.